Daniel Hayes ripped the wine glass out of the rich man's hand and slammed it down so hard the whole table jumped because that man had just called his 6-year-old daughter a charity case, loud enough for 200 guests to hear. The room went dead silent. Every millionaire in that hall turned to stare at the single father in the borrowed gray suit. And that's the exact moment a billionaire named Victoria Sterling, a woman who never spoke to anyone beneath her, pushed back her chair and started walking straight toward him. But here's what nobody in that room knew before the night ended. One of these two strangers would hand the other something worth more than every dollar under that roof. Before we start, drop the city you're watching from in the comments, so I can see how far this story travels tonight, and subscribe so you don't miss how it ends. Daniel Hayes had not raised his voice in 3 years. Not once. Not when the bank called about the second mortgage. Not when his boss took credit for a design that had kept him up for 6 straight nights. Not even when he stood at the edge of a grave that swallowed the only woman he had ever loved. He had learned to fold his anger into a small hard square and tuck it somewhere behind his ribs where nobody could see it. So when the glass hit the table and the sound cracked across the reception hall like a rifle shot, even Daniel was surprised at his own hand. "Say it again," Daniel said. His voice was quiet. That was the frightening part. It wasn't loud. It was steady, and it was cold. "You said what about my daughter?" The man across from him was tall, tan, and dressed in a suit that cost more than Daniel's car. His name was Preston Vane, and he was the kind of man who had never in his life been told to sit down. He looked at Daniel's hand still pinning the glass to the linen, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he has never once been hit in the mouth. "Relax, friend," Preston said. "I said she's adorable. A little charity case in a party dress. It's sweet, really. Somebody at this wedding actually needs the free food." There were maybe 15 people close enough to hear it clearly. Daniel heard every syllable land. And behind Preston, half a step back holding a napkin she had folded into a tiny paper swan, stood Lily, 6 years old. Wearing the yellow dress Daniel had ironed himself at midnight because he didn't own an iron and had to borrow one from the neighbor. She had heard the words. Daniel could see it in her face, the way her little smile had frozen, the way her eyes had gone to the floor, the way she was already trying to make herself smaller because she thought she had done something wrong. That was what broke him, not the insult to himself. He had absorbed 1,000 of those. It was watching his daughter learn in real time that some people would look at her and see less. "Lily," Daniel said, not taking his eyes off Preston. "Come here, sweetheart." She came around the table quickly and pressed herself against his leg. Daniel let go of the glass. He crouched down to her level, right there in front of everyone, and he put both hands on her shoulders. "You did nothing wrong," he told her. "You hear me? Nothing. That man is confused about something, and it isn't you." "Daddy, is he mad at us?" she whispered. "No, baby. He's just not very happy inside. And people who aren't happy inside sometimes say ugly things, so other people feel as bad as they do." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But we don't do that, do we?" "No. That's my girl." He stood back up. And now the whole room was watching because word of a scene travels faster than any music, and the band had trailed off, and even the bartender had stopped pouring. Daniel felt 200 faces turn toward him, waiting to see what the man in the cheap suit would do. "You know what, Preston," Daniel said. "I'm going to thank you." Preston blinked. "Thank me for showing my daughter exactly what she should never grow up to be." Daniel picked up his own untouched glass of champagne, the one he had been holding all night like a prop, and he set it gently in Preston's hand. "You look thirsty. Here, on the house." And he took Lily's hand and turned to walk away. Which is when the second thing happened, the thing that changed the entire trajectory of Daniel Hayes's life. A voice cut across the hall, clear, precise, used to being obeyed. "Preston." Every head turned. Because everyone in that room knew that voice, and everyone in that room knew what it meant when Victoria Sterling used your name like a blade. She was already on her feet. 41 years old, black dress, no jewelry, except a single band she never explained to anyone. She ran a holding company that touched 3 industries and 11,000 employees, and she had a reputation carefully earned of being impossible to move. People had described her in the business press as glacial. One columnist had famously written that Victoria Sterling had the warmth of a bank vault and the patience of a tax audit. Right now, she was walking straight down the center of the reception hall, past the ice sculpture, past the cake, past 100 people who had spent years trying to get 5 minutes of her attention and never once succeeded. She wasn't walking toward Preston. She was walking toward Daniel. "Miss Sterling." Preston started straightening his jacket, arranging his face into the smile he used on people who could help him. "I didn't realize you're going to leave," Victoria said. She didn't even look at him. She was looking at Lily. "Now. And you're going to do it quietly, because the only thing worse than being cruel to a child at a wedding is being remembered for it. And I have an excellent memory, Preston. Ask anyone whose contract I've reviewed." The color went out of Preston's face. He opened his mouth, closed it. And then, because a man like that always finds a way to protect himself, he laughed, set the champagne glass down, and walked off toward the exit, muttering something nobody could hear. Then Victoria Sterling, the woman who did not talk to people, who left charity galas early, who had once made a senator wait 90 minutes and then rescheduled, crouched down in front of a 6-year-old girl in a borrowed yellow dress. "That," she said to Lily, "is the most beautiful paper swan I have ever seen. Did you make that yourself?" Lily nodded, wide-eyed, still half hidden behind her father's leg. "Would you teach me? I run a very large company and I cannot fold a napkin to save my life. It's embarrassing, honestly." And Lily, who a moment ago had been shrinking into the floor, giggled. Daniel didn't know what to say. For 3 years, his whole existence had been about protecting this little girl from a world that kept taking things away from her. And he had spent that entire time believing he had to do it alone, because that's what happens when the person who was supposed to help you carry the weight is gone. And now a stranger worth more money than he could imagine, was on her knees on the ballroom floor making his daughter laugh. "Thank you," Daniel managed. "You didn't have to do that." Victoria stood back up, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, and something passed between them that neither of them could have named yet. Recognition, maybe. 2 people who had learned to survive by making themselves invisible, standing in the middle of a crowded room, suddenly seen. "No," Victoria said. "I didn't have to. But I've spent a very long time in rooms full of people like Preston Vane. And I've noticed something." She glanced back toward the exit where he had gone. "The ones who need the most to feel big are usually the ones who feel smallest inside. You said it better than I could have, actually. To your daughter." She paused. "I've never heard anyone explain cruelty to a child so kindly." "She's 6, Daniel said. "She's going to run into a lot worse than that man. I'd rather she learns now that it says more about them than her." Victoria studied him for a long moment, and then she said something that Daniel would remember for the rest of his life, though he didn't know it yet. "Where did you learn to be so calm?" He almost laughed. "I'm not calm, ma'am. I'm just tired." Rewind 6 hours, and Daniel Hayes had not wanted to come at all. The invitation had sat on his kitchen counter for 2 weeks, propped against the salt shaker, and every time he walked past it, he thought about the same thing. Weddings. His brother Michael was getting married on a lakeside estate that Daniel could never afford to rent for a single hour to a woman whose family owned half the marinas in the state. It was going to be beautiful, and that was exactly the problem. "You're not going," Michael had said on the phone 3 weeks earlier. It wasn't a question. Michael knew his brother. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to. I can hear you not saying it." A pause. "Danny, it's my wedding." "I know it's your wedding." "I want my brother there." Daniel had closed his eyes. "Weddings are hard for me, Mikey. You know that." There was a long silence on the line. Michael was 4 years younger, and for most of their lives Daniel had been the one taking care of him after their father left, after their mother worked herself into an early grave. Daniel had been the one who stayed home from his own senior prom, to make sure Michael got to his baseball games. Michael knew all of this. He knew that his big brother had spent his whole life showing up for other people and almost never for himself. "It's been 3 years, Danny," Michael said finally gently. "Sarah wouldn't want you sitting in that house forever." "Don't," Daniel said. "Don't tell me what Sarah would want." "I'm sorry." "I know. I'm sorry too." Daniel had rubbed his eyes. "I'll think about it." And he would have thought about it right up until the day of the wedding, and then found a reason not to go a headache, a work deadline, Lily coming down with something, except that Lily herself settled it. She had found the invitation. She couldn't read all the words, but she recognized the picture of the 2 swans on the front, and she'd carried it to him while he was washing dishes and held it up. "Daddy, is this the party for Uncle Mikey?" "It is, sweetheart." "Are we going?" "I don't think so, baby." "Why not?" And Daniel had stood there, hands in the dishwater, trying to find a way to explain to a 6-year-old that weddings made him feel like his chest was caving in, that the last wedding he'd been to had been his own, that he could still remember exactly how Sarah looked walking toward him, and how he'd thought with total certainty that they had a whole lifetime ahead of them. "It's grown-up stuff," he'd said instead. Lily had considered this. Then she'd said the thing that Daniel would think about for years afterward. "Dad," she said, "maybe happy things can happen at weddings too, not just sad things." He'd turned off the water, looked at his daughter, 6 years old and already trying to take care of him the way children of grieving parents so often do, and that broke his heart more than anything else, because it was supposed to be the other way around. "Yeah," he'd said, his voice rough. "Maybe they can." So he dug his one good suit out of the closet, a gray one, 3 years old. A little tight in the shoulders now, because grief had made him thin, and then work had made him solid again. He'd ironed Lily's yellow dress at midnight, and he'd driven the 40 minutes out to the estate, telling himself the whole way that he would put in an hour. Be seen, be a good brother, and then leave before the dancing started, before the toasts, before all the parts that hurt. He had not planned to speak to a single soul. He had certainly not planned to speak to Victoria Sterling. What Daniel didn't know, what nobody in that hall knew, was that Victoria almost hadn't come either. She was there because the groom's new father-in-law was a man she had done business with for 15 years, and there were relationships you honored, even when you would rather be anywhere else. She had planned to arrive late, stay exactly 90 minutes, congratulate the couple, and leave. She had a car waiting. She had told her assistant she'd be home by 10, because Victoria Sterling did not do well at weddings either. 4 years earlier, she had been engaged. His name was James, and he had been the one person alive who saw past the company and the money and the reputation. The one person who used to leave her voicemails just to sing badly into the phone to make her laugh in the middle of board meetings. They had been 11 days from their own wedding when a truck ran a red light on Fremont Avenue, and Victoria had gone from being a bride to being a woman who buried the only man who had ever known her real laugh. She had responded to it the only way she knew how. She had gone back to work. She had acquired 2 companies that quarter. She had built the walls higher and thicker and told everyone she was fine. Told the board she was fine. Told the press she was fine until she almost believed it herself. But there were nights always at exactly the wrong moment. A certain song, a certain slant of evening light when the wall came down all at once, and she had to sit very still in the back of a car and wait for it to pass. She had built an empire because it was easier than being alone in a quiet house. She understood that about herself. She was not stupid about her own grief. She just didn't know what to do with it. So when she had walked into that reception hall and scanned the room the way she scanned every room, cataloging threats, allies, exits, she had noticed almost immediately the man standing alone by the far wall. She had noticed him because he was doing the exact thing she did. Present, but not present. Holding a drink, he wasn't drinking. Watching everyone celebrate from behind an invisible pane of glass. She had recognized it instantly, the way you recognize your own reflection in a dark window. And then Preston Vane had opened his mouth, and Victoria had watched the whole thing unfold. and she had watched this stranger crouch down in front of his daughter and choose kindness over rage in front of the entire room, and something in her chest that had been frozen for 4 years had shifted just slightly, just enough. She had not planned to walk over, but some part of her, the part James used to talk to, had stood up before the rest of her had decided anything. "You're hiding from the wedding, too," Victoria said. "Aren't you?" They had drifted without quite deciding to toward the tall windows at the edge of the hall, away from the noise. Lily had been claimed by a cluster of other children near the dessert table, and Daniel had one eye on her at all times the way he always did. He looked at Victoria surprised. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to another person doing the same thing." She tilted her head toward the crowd. "You've been standing in this corner for an hour. You haven't touched your drink. You keep looking at the exit, and every time the band plays something slow, you flinch." Daniel let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "You've been watching me. I watch everyone. It's a professional habit. Most people are easy to read. You weren't." She looked at him directly. "You looked like a man who'd learned how to disappear in plain sight. I know that look. I wear it myself." For a moment, Daniel didn't answer. He was used to small talk at things like this. What do you do? Where are you from? How do you know the couple? The polite little exchanges that never went anywhere. He was not used to a stranger saying something true to him inside the first minute. "My wife used to say the same thing," he said finally. "That I could vanish while standing right in front of her. It drove her crazy." "Used to. She passed away 3 years ago." He said it plainly, the way you learn to say it after enough repetitions, because if you let your voice break every time, you'd never get through a conversation. "Car accident. It was fast. That's what everyone tells me anyway. Like it's supposed to help." Victoria was quiet. And then, instead of the thing that everyone always said, "I'm so sorry, that's so terrible," I can't imagine she said something else. "People tell you it was fast because they need it to be true," she said. "It makes them less afraid. It has nothing to do with you." Daniel turned and really looked at her for the first time. "Yeah," he said slowly. "That's exactly it. That's exactly what it feels like." He shook his head. "Nobody's ever put it that way." "I've had some practice," Victoria said. "On the receiving end." "You lost someone." "My fiancé. 4 years ago. 11 days before the wedding." She said it the same way he had, flatly, precisely, the words worn smooth from handling. "So I understand the flinch when the band plays something slow." They stood there together in the noise, two strangers who had just told each other the one true thing at the center of their lives, and for a long moment neither of them felt the need to say anything at all. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said eventually. "You can ask. I know who you are. Everybody in this room knows who you are. There are people here who'd trade a kidney for the conversation you're having with me right now." He gestured slightly at the room. "So why are you over here in the corner talking to a guy who designs starter homes for a living?" Victoria considered him, and what she said surprised them both. "Because you're the only person in this room who wanted absolutely nothing from me," she said. "Do you know how rare that is? Everyone in here has an angle, a pitch, and ask a favor they've been saving up. I could see them circling all night. And then there was you in your corner wanting nothing from anyone, just trying to get through the evening so you could take your daughter home." She paused. "It was the most restful thing I'd seen in years." "I do want something," Daniel said. Victoria's expression cooled by half a degree, an old reflex. "And there it is." "I want to make it to my car without crying in front of 200 rich strangers," Daniel said. "That's the whole list." And Victoria Sterling, glacial, impossible to impress warmth of a bank vault, Victoria Sterling laughed. A real laugh surprised out of her, the kind she hadn't laughed in longer than she could remember. "That," she said, "is an achievable goal. I can help you with that." Miso. They talked longer than either of them intended. Daniel found out that she had grown up poor. Actually, poor food stamps. Poor a fact she had buried so deeply that the business press invented a whole fictional pedigree for her, and she never bothered to correct it. He found out that she worked 70 hours a week, not because she loved it, but because the alternative was going home. He found out that she remembered the names of the security guards in her building, all 9 of them, and their kids' names too, and that she quietly paid the college tuition of 3 of those kids, and had made them all sign agreements never to tell anyone, including her own board. Why the secret? Daniel asked. Because if people find out you're kind, they line up, she said. And then you can never tell who's real. It's easier to let them all think I'm cold. Cold people get left alone. That sounds lonely. It is, she said simply. But loneliness is quiet, and I can work in the quiet. She found out in return that Daniel had once dreamed of designing real buildings. Museums, libraries, the kind of structures that outlive their architects, and that he'd given it up when Sarah got pregnant, because starter homes paid steadier and he needed steady. She found out that after Sarah died, he had turned down a promotion that would have doubled his salary because it required travel, and there was no one else to pick Lily up from kindergarten. You turned down double your salary, Victoria repeated. I turned down double my salary. Do you know how many people I've met who would sell their own mother for double their salary? Do you have kids? Daniel asked. No. Then you don't know yet. He said it without judgment. When you've got someone that small depending on you, it changes the math. There's no amount of money that's worth her thinking her dad chose a job over her. She already lost one parent. I'm not going to make her feel like she's losing pieces of the other one too. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. And then she said almost to herself, James would have liked you. Your fiancé. He used to tell me I measured everything in the wrong units. Dollars, deadlines, market share. She looked out at the crowd and her voice went somewhere far away. He said I'd built the most successful life he'd ever seen, and I still hadn't figured out what it was for. She turned back to Daniel. You seem to have figured out what yours is for. I didn't figure it out, Daniel said. It was decided for me, in a hospital hallway 3 years ago. He watched Lily across the room spinning in her yellow dress, showing another little girl how to fold a paper swan. Everything I've got left, I already know what it's for. Her. That's the whole answer. It's not complicated when you've got nothing else. You don't have nothing else, Victoria said, and she didn't fully understand why she said it. Daniel looked at her. I mean, she said, recovering the professional distance she wore like armor. You have a career, skills. You're clearly very good at what you do, whether or not you get to build museums. She stopped. That wasn't what she had meant, and they both knew it, and the small, honest thing hung in the air between them. It was Lily who broke it. She came running across the hall, weaving between the tables, and she skidded to a stop in front of them and tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Daddy. Daddy? I made a swan for the nice lady. She held it up. It was lopsided, and one wing was bigger than the other, and it was without question the finest thing in that entire $800,000 wedding. Is she still here? I want to give it to her. She's right here, baby, Daniel said. Lily turned, looked up, and her whole face lit up when she realized the nice lady from before was still there. This is for you, Lily said solemnly, presenting the swan with both hands. So you can practice, so you're not embarrassed anymore at your big company. And Victoria Sterling, who negotiated 9-figure deals without blinking, who had once stared down a hostile takeover with her heart rate never breaking. 60 knelt down on the floor of a wedding hall and took a lopsided paper swan from a 6-year-old girl and had to look away for a moment because her eyes had gone hot, and she absolutely was not going to cry in front of 200 people. Thank you, she said, and her voice wasn't quite steady, and she didn't try to hide it. I'm going to keep this on my desk, right next to the phone, so every time somebody important calls, I'll see it first. Promise, Lily said. I promise. Pinky promise. Victoria held out her little finger. Pinky promise. Daniel watched the two of them. His daughter and this stranger hooked their fingers together over a paper swan, and something happened inside his chest that he hadn't felt in 3 years. It wasn't hope exactly. He wasn't ready for anything as big as hope. It was smaller and quieter than that. It was the sensation of a door he'd nailed shut a long time ago, moving just slightly on its hinges. The feeling of a wall that had been solid for 3 years developing for the first time the smallest hairline crack. He didn't trust it. He'd learned not to trust good feelings because in his experience, they were usually the setup for something worse, but he felt it anyway. "Lily," he said gently, "why don't you go say goodbye to your cousins? We're going to head home soon. Okay?" "Okay, Daddy." And she was gone again, off across the room, the way children move, all forward motion, no looking back. Daniel turned to Victoria, who was still holding the swan carefully in both hands, like it was made of glass. "She likes you," he said. "That doesn't happen. Not since she doesn't warm up to people. Not anymore. She used to. Before." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "She's remarkable," Victoria said. "You did that. However you got here, whatever it cost you, you raised a child who folds swans for strangers because she wants them to feel less embarrassed. Do you understand how rare that is? I've been in rooms with the most powerful people on earth, and I have never once seen a single one of them do something that pure." "She got the good parts from her mother," Daniel said quietly. "No," Victoria said. "She got them from the parent who stayed." The band started up again, something slow, and Daniel felt the old flinch coming, the reflex, the memory. But this time, standing next to this woman who understood exactly why he flinched, it didn't cut as deep as it usually did. "I should go," he said, though part of him didn't want to, and that surprised him too. "It's past her bedtime, and I promised myself an hour, and I've done—" He checked his watch and blinked 3. 3 hours, Victoria said. In a corner, hiding. Turns out the corner had company. She almost smiled. Then she reached into a small clutch that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage and pulled out a plain white card, and she wrote something on the back of it, not her office number. He'd realize later, but a different one, a private one, that maybe 6 people on Earth possessed. "I run a company," she said, holding out the card. "And I have a project. A real one, not a starter home." She watched his face carefully. "There's an old building downtown. Historic. Beautiful, or it was. Everyone I've hired wants to tear it down and put up something that prints money. And every time I look at their drawings, I feel like I'm signing a death certificate for something that shouldn't die." She paused. "I don't know why I'm telling you this at a wedding, except that you're the only architect I've met all year who talked about buildings like they were worth saving. So, that's my card. If you ever want to talk about a building that deserves to keep standing, call the number on the back." Daniel took the card, looked at it, looked at her. "I design starter homes, Miss Sterling." "You design homes," Victoria said. "The word starter is something other people put in front of it. I stopped letting other people put words in front of mine a long time ago." She nodded toward Lily, who was hugging her cousins goodbye across the room. "You should too, for her sake, if not yours." And Daniel Hayes, who had come to this wedding to be invisible, who had planned to slip out before the toasts, who had spent 3 years believing that the best part of his life was already behind him, and the only thing left to do was hold the line. For his daughter stood in that hall with a billionaire's private phone number in one hand and a lopsided reflection of his own kindness playing out across the room, and felt for the first time in a very long time like the story of his life might not be finished after all. He didn't call the number that night, or the next day. But he didn't throw the card away either. He put it in the inside pocket of his one good suit right over his chest, and he drove his daughter home under a sky full of stars. And when Lily fell asleep in the back seat, still clutching a leftover paper swan, Daniel looked at her in the rearview mirror and said very quietly to no one and to everyone, "Maybe you were right, baby. Maybe happy things can happen at weddings too." And 40 minutes away, in a house far too large for one person, Victoria Sterling set a lopsided paper swan on the desk where she made every important decision of her life, and she looked at it for a long time, and for the first time in 4 years, she did not go straight to her laptop. She just sat there. And she let herself remember what it felt like to laugh. The card stayed in Daniel's suit pocket for 11 days. He knew because he counted. Every morning he'd hang the gray jacket back on the hook by the door, and every morning he'd feel the small, stiff rectangle in the inside pocket right over his heart, and every morning he'd tell himself the same thing. She was being polite, he said to the coffee maker one Tuesday out loud, which was a habit he'd picked up living alone with a 6-year-old. Rich people say things at weddings. It doesn't mean anything. But he didn't throw the card away. On the 12th day, Lily brought it up over breakfast because children remember everything and forget nothing that matters to them. "Daddy, did you call the Swan lady?" Daniel nearly dropped the milk. "The what?" "The nice lady from Uncle Mikey's wedding. The one I gave the swan to. Did you call her?" Lily was working through a bowl of cereal with the focus of a surgeon. "You said you might." "I don't think I said that, sweetheart. You said we'll see." Lily pointed her spoon at him. "That means yes, but slow." Daniel stared at his daughter. 6 years old, and she'd already cracked the entire adult language. "It's complicated, baby." "Why?" "Because she's a very important, very busy person, and I'm—" He stopped. "You're what?" "I'm just Dad." Lily set down her spoon and looked at him with an expression that was so much like her mother's that it physically hurt him. That flat, disappointed patience Sarah used to level at him whenever he sold himself short. "You're not just anything," Lily said. "You're the best dad." She said so. She said, "You're the parent who stayed." I heard her. She picked her spoon back up. "So you should call her. She promised to keep my swan on her desk, and I want to know if she really did." And that was how Daniel Hayes ended up standing in his kitchen at 7:40 in the morning, phone in his hand, staring at 10 digits on the back of a white card, feeling his heart hammer like he was 17 years old. He almost hung up twice before it connected. "This is Victoria." Not Sterling residence, not an assistant, just her voice, the same clear, precise voice that had cut Preston Vane in half across a wedding hall. "Miss Sterling, hi. You probably don't remember we met at—" "Daniel Hayes," Victoria said, and he could hear something in her voice that hadn't been there a second before. Warmth, maybe. Surprise. "The architect who designs homes. How's Lily?" He blinked. "You remember her name?" "I remember everything," Victoria said. "It's a professional habit and a personal curse." "How is she?" She's the reason I'm calling, actually." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "She wanted me to ask you something, and she won't let it go so." "Ask me." "Is the swan still on your desk?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had changed. It had gone quieter. "Hold on," she said. He heard movement, a door, and then her voice came back, and there was something almost shy in it, which was an impossible word to attach to a woman like that. "I'm looking at it right now," she said. "It's leaning against my monitor. One wing's bigger than the other. Tell her it survived a very important video conference on Thursday with a room full of men in Zurich who have no idea they were being watched by a paper swan the entire time." Daniel laughed. He couldn't help it. "She's going to lose her mind." "Good. Tell her I keep my promises." A beat. "And Daniel?" "Yeah. The other thing I said at the wedding, the building. That offer wasn't polite conversation. I don't do polite conversation. I don't have the time or the patience for it. Ask anyone." He heard her take a breath. "I meant it. Come look at the building. That's all I'm asking. Come look at it and tell me what you see. If you tell me it should come down, I'll believe you. But I need someone to tell me the truth, and everyone I pay to tell me the truth is lying to me because there's more money in the lie." Daniel gripped the edge of the counter. "Miss Sterling, I have to be honest with you. I've never worked on anything like that. I do subdivisions, 3-bedroom houses. I'm not the guy who saves historic buildings. You've got the wrong— Do you know why every architect I've hired wants to tear it down?" Victoria interrupted. "Because it's cheaper to build new." "Because they can't see it," she said. "They walk in and they see a liability, a code problem, a demolition cost. They don't see the building. You told me at that wedding that places carry memories. You said it like it was obvious. Nobody I pay $500,000 a year says things like that." She paused. "I don't need the best architect in the city, Daniel. I've hired 4 of them. I need one who can see. Come look at the building. 1 hour. I'll pay you for your time either way. Bring Lily if you have to. I'll find her something better to do than watch 2 adults argue about load-bearing walls." Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about the second mortgage. He thought about Lily's school shoes already too small. He thought about the promotion he'd turned down and the museums he'd never build, and the way he'd folded up his own dreams and put them in a drawer 3 years ago, and told himself he'd stopped needing them. "When?" he said. The building was on the corner of 9th and Marlowe, and Daniel knew it the second he saw it, because he'd walked past it 100 times as a kid. "The Ardmore," he said, standing on the sidewalk looking up. "This is the Ardmore. You know it." Victoria was beside him in a coat that probably cost more than his car, looking entirely out of place on the cracked downtown sidewalk and entirely unbothered by it. "Everybody who grew up around here knows it. My grandmother used to take me to the tea room on the 3rd floor when I was little. It closed when I was, I don't know, 9, 10. He walked toward the entrance and his whole posture had changed. Victoria noticed it immediately. He wasn't standing back anymore. He was leaning in. They had these tiles in the lobby, green and gold. My grandmother used to let me count them while she talked to her friends. There were 482. "You counted the tiles." I was 9 and bored. He reached the door and put his hand flat against the old brass. "Are they still in there? The tiles?" "I don't know," Victoria said. "I've been in this building exactly twice, and both times I had a lawyer on one side and an engineer on the other, telling me what it would cost to knock it down." Daniel turned to look at her. "You own it, and you've never actually looked at it. I own 41 buildings, Daniel. I don't have a personal relationship with all of them." But even as she said it, something flickered across her face like she'd heard how it sounded. "I bought it as part of a portfolio. The plan was always to redevelop the corner. It's prime real estate. The building is just in the way." "In the way," Daniel repeated. "That's what my board calls it." He pushed open the door and walked inside, and Victoria followed him, and she watched a transformation happen that she would think about for a long time afterward. Because the man who'd been just dad in the doorway of his own kitchen, the man who'd shrunk into the corner of a wedding hall, straightened up the moment he crossed the threshold of that ruined old building. He walked into the dim lobby, and he didn't see the water stains or the boarded windows or the half-century of dust. He crouched down and brushed his hand across the filthy floor, and when he pulled his hand back, there it was under the grime. Green and gold. "They're still here," he said, and his voice caught. "The tiles are still here. Daniel, 482 of them." He looked up at her from the floor, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Something young and open and completely without armor. "Miss Sterling, do you have any idea what you're sitting on? Do you know how much handwork went into these? Nobody makes floors like this anymore. Nobody can. The craftsmen who did this are all dead. If you tear this down, this doesn't come back. Not for any amount of money. This is the only one there is." Victoria stood very still. "Show me the rest," she said quietly. So he showed her. He walked her through that building for 2 hours, and it was nothing like the tours the engineers had given her. The engineers had shown her problems. Daniel showed her a building. He showed her the ceiling in the old tea room 30 feet up where someone a century ago had hand-painted a border of leaves and forgotten flowers faded now, but still there. He showed her the staircase. "Look at the way it curves. They call that a geometric stair. They figured out how to build this without a single central support, and we've mostly forgotten how. And the tall windows on the south face. And the way the light came through them even now through 100 years of dirt. You feel that?" he said, standing in the middle of the empty second floor, arms out. The light. This whole building was designed around the sun. They oriented it so the reading room would catch the morning and the tea room would catch the afternoon. Somebody thought about that. Somebody stood right here 100 years ago and thought about how the light would move through this room, and then they built it, and it's still doing exactly what they wanted it to do. He turned to her. You can't buy that. You can't build that on a deadline with a spreadsheet. You'd have to care, and nobody's paid to care anymore. You're not being paid to care either, Victoria said. I'm paying you for an hour of your time to tell me whether it should come down. Daniel looked at her. It shouldn't come down, he said. But you already knew that, or you wouldn't have hunted down a starter home architect at a wedding and put your private number on the back of a card. You didn't need me to tell you the truth, Miss Sterling. You needed somebody to say it out loud so you'd have permission to believe it. For a long moment, Victoria didn't say anything at all. And then she did something Daniel didn't expect. She laughed short and disbelieving and shook her head. James used to do that, she said. See straight through me like that. It's very irritating. Your fiancé. He'd have loved this building. He'd have loved you standing in the middle of it with your arms out, telling a billionaire she already knew the answer. She walked to one of the tall windows and looked out through the grime at the street below. I have a board meeting in 9 days. On the agenda is a vote to approve the demolition and break ground on a 40-story mixed-use tower. The projections on that tower are extraordinary. It would be financially the best decision I've made in 3 years. And I don't want to sign it. She said it like a confession, like it cost her something. I've been sitting on this vote for 4 months. My CFO thinks I'm losing my edge. Maybe I am. She turned back to face him. So here's what I'm going to do, and I need you to listen carefully because I only make offers like this once. I want you to design the alternative. Daniel went very still. I want you to take this building and show me what it could be, Victoria went on. Not a tower, not a teardown, a restoration. Something that saves the tiles and the staircase and the light and turns it into something that actually works, that people can use, that makes enough money to justify itself so my board doesn't have me committed. I want a full concept, drawings, a model, numbers, and I want it in 9 days so I can put it in front of that board and give them a choice. 9 days, Daniel said faintly. I'll pay you, properly, whatever your firm charges times 10, and you'll bill me directly, not through them, because I want you, not your firm. She named a number, then casually, the way she might mention the weather, and Daniel had to put his hand on the windowsill because it was more money than he'd made in the last 2 years combined. Miss Sterling, Victoria, I can't. I have a job. I have a boss. I can't just take a leave or quit or do it nights and weekends. I don't care how you get it done. I care that it gets done. She crossed the room and stood in front of him. You told me at the wedding that you gave up designing real buildings when Lily came along. Museums, libraries, the things that outlive you. Her voice softened. This building has stood for 100 years, Daniel. If you save it, it'll stand for 100 more. Your name will be on it. Lily will be able to bring her kids here someday and say, my father did this. You want to talk about what things are for. That's what this is for. That's what I'm offering you. And Daniel Hayes, standing in a ruined tea room where his grandmother had once let him count tiles, felt the drawer he'd shut 3 years ago slide all the way open. Why me? He said. It came out rougher than he meant it. Really? Why me? You could have anyone. Why the guy in the borrowed suit? Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and when she answered, she told him the truth, which was not something she did often. Because for 4 years I've been surrounded by people who see exactly what things cost and nothing about what they're worth, she said. And then a man knelt down at a wedding and told his little girl that a cruel man was just unhappy inside. And I thought there's someone who still knows the difference. There's someone who could look at a broken thing and see what it used to be instead of just what it would cost to haul away. Her voice dropped. I need to be around that. I've forgotten how to see it myself. I need someone to remind me. Daniel didn't have an answer for that. It landed somewhere too deep for words. I'll do it, he said. But I have conditions. Victoria's eyebrow went up. You have conditions. 2. He held up his fingers. 1. Lily comes first. If she's sick, if there's a school thing, if she needs me, I'm gone no matter what's on the schedule, no matter whose board meeting it is. That's non-negotiable. If that's a problem, we shake hands right now and I go home. Done, Victoria said instantly. That's not a condition, that's the only sane thing anyone said to me in months. What's 2? 2. Daniel looked at her steadily. You don't get to disappear on me. If I'm going to bet everything on 9 days and 1 board meeting, I need to know you're actually in it, not hiding in your corner. I saw you at that wedding, Victoria. You were doing the same thing. I was standing in a room full of people and being somewhere else entirely. If we're doing this, I need you here, present, for real. It was, Victoria realized the exact thing she'd said to him. You looked like a man who'd learned to disappear in plain sight. He'd turned it around and handed it back. That's a harder condition than the first one, she said quietly. I know. Nobody's asked me to be present in 4 years. Do you understand? People ask me for money, access decisions, favors my signature. Nobody asks me to actually be there. I'm asking. She held out her hand. Deal, she said. And when Daniel shook it, something passed between them again, the same current that had run through them both across a crowded wedding hall, and neither of them let go quite as fast as a business handshake required, and both of them noticed, and neither of them said a word about it. The next 9 days rearranged Daniel's entire life. He quit his job. He did it on the second day after lying awake the whole first night doing math and coming to the terrifying conclusion that Victoria's offer, if it went through, meant he'd never have to lie awake doing math again. His boss, the one who'd taken credit for his designs for 6 years, was so stunned he actually stood up from his desk. You're making a mistake, Hayes, he said. You've got a good steady thing here. You've got a kid to feed. You're going to walk away from a guaranteed paycheck to gamble on some rich woman's pet project. What happens when it falls through? Then it falls through, Daniel said, and I'll have designed something real for 9 days, which is more than I've done here in 6 years. He picked up the box of his things off the desk. You know what, Rick, keep the coffee mug. Consider it a going-away gift. He set up a workspace in his dining room. He covered the table in tracing paper, and the walls in printouts and photographs of the Ardmore, and he worked after Lily went to bed until 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and then got up at 6:30 to make her breakfast and take her to school, running on coffee, and something he hadn't felt in years, which was the electric current of doing work that mattered. And Victoria, to his genuine surprise, kept her end of the deal. She showed up. Not through an assistant, not by phone, she showed up. She came to the dining room on the 3rd night still in her work clothes, and she looked at the drawings spread across his table, and she asked real questions. And when Lily padded out in her pajamas because she'd heard voices, Victoria didn't wave her away. Is that my swan? Lily said, pointing at the drawings, because there in the corner of the main concept sketch, tiny tucked into a rendering of the restored lobby, Daniel had drawn a small paper swan on a reception desk. That's your swan, Daniel confirmed. I put it in the drawing. Why? Because, Daniel said, the whole idea of this building is that we keep the things that matter instead of throwing them away. And your swan matters, so it's in the plan. Lily beamed like she had been knighted, and Victoria, standing over the drawings, had to press her lips together and look at the ceiling for a second. You put a paper swan in a $100 million architectural concept, she said. I did. My board is going to have questions. Then I'll answer them, Daniel said. The swan stays. Victoria came back the 4th night. And the 5th. On the 6th night, she brought dinner, actual dinner, from a place with cloth napkins, because she'd noticed there was almost nothing in his refrigerator, and she'd figured out correctly that he'd been feeding Lily first and himself with whatever was left, which lately was not much. You don't have to do that, Daniel said when she set the bags on the counter. I know I don't have to. I own a company, Daniel. I'm aware of the concept of things I don't have to do. She started unpacking cartons. You're working 18 hours a day on my building and living on coffee and toast. I need you functional. This is a business expense. Uh-huh. It's a business expense. Whatever helps you sleep, Victoria. She stopped and looked at him across the counter, and for a second, neither of them was talking about dinner at all. Very little helps me sleep, she said, and it came out more honest than she'd intended. It's been that way for 4 years. Daniel set down his pencil. Me too, he said. 3. They stood there in the small kitchen, the smell of good food between them. Two people who hadn't slept properly in years, and it would have been the easiest thing in the world to close the distance. He saw her think about it. He thought about it himself. And then Lily's voice came from the other room. Is that food? I smell food. And the moment folded itself back up and got put away gently by both of them for later. Later, Victoria said, reading his face, and it wasn't clear even to her what she meant by it. Later, Daniel agreed. On the 7th day, the trouble started. Daniel found out about it because Victoria went quiet in a way he was learning to read. She'd come by to look at the model he'd built, an actual physical model of the restored Ardmore, 3 feet long, that he'd stayed up until 5 to finish, and she should have been happy because it was beautiful, and instead she stood looking at it with her jaw set and her eyes somewhere else. What's wrong? Daniel said. Not a question. He'd gotten good at reading her. Nothing. It's beautiful. Better than I hoped. Victoria, what's wrong? She sat down heavily in one of his dining chairs, which he'd never once seen her do. She was a woman who occupied space like she was ready to leave it at any second, and she rubbed her forehead. There's a man on my board, she said. Gerald Ashford. He's been on the board longer than I've owned the company. He came with the last acquisition, and I couldn't get rid of him. He controls a voting block, enough shares that if he swings the room, he swings the vote. She looked up. He wants the tower. Badly. There's money in it for people he knows. And he found out I've been working with an outside architect on an alternative, and he's been asking questions. What kind of questions? About you. Victoria's voice was flat and hard. Who you are. Where you came from. What firm you're with, except you're not with a firm anymore. Are you? Because you quit to do this. He's found out that you design subdivisions, that you have no experience with historic restoration, that you're... She stopped. That I'm what? His words, not mine. Say it. Victoria met his eyes. That you're some single dad she found at a wedding. That I've apparently lost my judgment. That the great Victoria Sterling is about to bet a 9-figure decision on an unqualified nobody, because... She stopped again, and this time the color came up in her face. Because what, Victoria? Because he's implying it's not about the building. She said it fast, like ripping off a bandage. He's implying I've got personal reasons. That I'm compromised. That there's something going on between us and it's clouding my judgment. And he's going to stand up in that board meeting in 2 days and say it out loud in front of 14 people and use it to kill your design and take the vote. The dining room was very quiet. Is there, Daniel said. Is there what? Something going on between us. And there it was, finally out loud, sitting in the middle of the room, where neither of them could pretend not to see it. Victoria stood up. She walked to the model, the beautiful model of the building he'd stayed up all night to save, and she put one finger very gently on the tiny paper swan he'd built into the lobby. I don't know, she said, and it might have been the most vulnerable thing she'd said to anyone in 4 years. I know that this is the first time in 4 years I haven't dreaded going home because I keep finding reasons to come here instead. I know that your daughter drew me a swan, and I keep it on the desk where I make every decision worth millions of dollars, and I look at it more than I look at any of them. I know that when Gerald Ashford stood in my office today and called you some single dad, I wanted to fire him on the spot, and I've never wanted to fire anyone over a person before in my life. She turned to face him. So, no, I don't know if there's something going on between us. But I know that Gerald Ashford isn't entirely wrong, and that terrifies me, because if he's right, then he can use it to burn down the one true thing I've built in 4 years, which is standing in this dining room right now. Daniel crossed the room to her, slowly. And he stopped closer than business, and he looked down at her. Then let him try, Daniel said quietly. Let him stand up in that room and say, "I'm just a single dad." You know what I am. Victoria, I'm a man who quit a steady job to save a building that everybody else wanted to bury. I'm a man who counted 482 tiles when I was 9 years old and remembered every one of them. I'm a man who's going to stand next to you in that board meeting if you'll let me, and show 14 people something they've never seen before. He took a breath. Let him call me a single dad. It's the proudest thing I've ever been. He can say it like an insult. I'll wear it like a medal. Victoria looked up at him, and for a second her whole careful architecture, the walls, the armor, the glacial distance cracked wide open, and she let him see the woman underneath the one who'd been alone in a too-big house for 4 years. You'd come to the board meeting, she said. You'd stand in front of Gerald Ashford and 14 shareholders and defend a building nobody but you believes in. I'd stand in front of anybody, Daniel said, for something worth saving. And they both knew standing there that he wasn't only talking about the building. From the other room, small and sleepy, came Lily's voice. Daddy, is the Swan Lady staying for a bedtime story? Daniel didn't take his eyes off Victoria. Are you? He asked. Staying. And Victoria Sterling, who had a car waiting and a board briefing to prep and a war to fight in 48 hours and every reason in the world to walk out the door and go back to being the untouchable woman the world thought she was, set down her keys on Daniel's kitchen counter. Yeah, she said, and her voice wasn't quite steady. I'm staying. And she walked into a little girl's room to hear a bedtime story, and Daniel stood in his kitchen and watched her go, and understood that in 2 days, everything he'd rebuilt could be taken from him by a man who'd already decided he was nothing, and that he was going to fight for it anyway. The bedtime story lasted 20 minutes, and when Victoria came back out of Lily's room, she was different, and Daniel saw it immediately. She fell asleep before the end, Victoria said. She stood in the doorway, and her hand was still on the frame, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to come all the way back into the room. She made me promise to tell her how it ended tomorrow. I told her the frog turned back into a prince, and she said that was obvious and fell asleep anyway. That's her review of most things, Daniel said. Obvious. She's a tough critic. She held my hand. Daniel looked up from the model. While I read, Victoria said. Her voice had gone strange. She just reached over and held my hand, like it was nothing, like people do that. She looked at her own hand like it belonged to someone else. Nobody's held my hand in 4 years, Daniel. I negotiate billion-dollar deals. I fire people. I've had grown men cry in my office. And your 6-year-old just reached over and held my hand while I read her a story about a frog and I... She stopped. Her jaw worked. I had to keep reading. I couldn't let my voice do the thing it wanted to do. Daniel set down his pencil. Come here, he said quietly. Daniel, I'm not going to do anything. Come here. She came. And he didn't take her hand, and he didn't close the distance the way part of both of them wanted, because Gerald Ashford's accusation was sitting in the room like a live wire, and they both knew it. He just stood close to her, and he said the thing she needed to hear. That's what it's supposed to feel like, he said. That's not weakness, Victoria. That's the thing all the money is supposed to buy and never does. A kid holding your hand because she trusts you. That's the whole game. Everything else is just noise to fill up the quiet. Victoria closed her eyes. He's going to use her, she said. Ashford. He's going to stand up in that boardroom and say I've gotten sentimental. That I've let a single father and his little girl cloud a 9-figure business decision. And the worst part, Daniel, the part that's keeping me up, she opened her eyes, is that he might be right. Maybe I can't see the building clearly anymore. Maybe I want to save it because I want to save something, anything, and it happens to be the thing standing in front of me. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Can I show you something? He said. He walked her over to the drawing spread across the dining table, and he pulled one out from the bottom of the stack. A page she hadn't seen covered in numbers. This is the part I haven't shown you yet, he said, because I wanted it right before I did. He tapped the page. You want to know if you're being sentimental? Here's the answer. This is the financial model, the full restoration, adaptive reuse, mixed commercial and residential. Ground floor retail. The tile lobby becomes an anchor. People will pay a premium to have their business in a lobby like that. It's a marketing asset. Floors 2 through 6, boutique office. 7 and 8 residential, and Victoria the residential in a restored historic building. Rents for 40% more than new construction, because there's only one of them and there will never be another. Nobody can compete with a 100-year-old building because you can't build a new 100-year-old building. He looked at her. The tower makes more money in year 1. I'll give Ashford that. But the tower depreciates. It's a commodity. There's 40 of them going up in this city. This building appreciates. In 15 years, it's worth more than the tower. And in 50, it's a landmark. And a landmark is an asset you literally cannot replace. He straightened up. You're not being sentimental. You're being right. You just haven't had the numbers to prove it. Now you do. Victoria stared at the page. Then she stared at him. You did the financials, she said slowly. You, a subdivision architect. I did the financials, Daniel said, because I knew that if I walked into that boardroom with a beautiful drawing and a sad story about tiles, Ashford would eat me alive. I've been dealing with men like Ashford my whole life, Victoria. Rich guys who think a man in a cheap suit can't count. He tapped the page again. So I counted. I stayed up 2 nights, and I counted everything. He wants to fight me on money, fine. I'll fight him on money. And I'll win, because his tower is a bet on next year, and my building is a bet on the next 100, and any man who can't see that shouldn't be on your board in the first place. For a long moment, Victoria didn't say anything. And then she laughed, a real one, the kind he'd surprised out of her at the wedding, and she pressed her hand flat against the drawings. You've been sandbagging me, she said. This whole time. Everybody thinks you're the sweet single dad who talks about light and memories, and underneath I'm a guy who's been underestimated his entire life, Daniel said, and learned to use it. You've got a 9-figure decision, Victoria. I'm not going to lose it because Ashford thinks I'm nobody. I want him to think I'm nobody. I want him to walk into that room feeling like he's already won. Daniel's jaw set. And then I want to hand you the pages, and I want to watch his face when he realizes the single dad from the wedding just outmodeled his entire finance team. Victoria looked at him with something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not warmth this time. Respect. The particular respect of one fighter for another. James was smart, she said quietly. James was one of the smartest men I ever knew. But James was smart the way people who've never been poor are smart. He'd never had to count. She shook her head slowly. You count everything, don't you? You've been counting your whole life. Tiles, dollars, every school shoe, and every gallon of gas. When you don't have much, Daniel said, you count what you've got. It's not a hardship. It's a skill. It's the skill that's going to win your board meeting. They had 36 hours. Daniel didn't sleep. He refined the model, sharpened the numbers, built a presentation he could deliver in his sleep, because he was fairly sure he'd be delivering it on no sleep at all. Victoria worked the phones quietly, carefully, one board member at a time, not asking for votes, just asking for open minds, because she knew Ashford was doing the same thing in the other direction and doing it harder. On the morning of the board meeting, Victoria called him at 6:30. There's a problem, she said. And Daniel's stomach dropped because he'd learned that when Victoria said, there's a problem, in that particular voice, it was serious. Tell me. Ashford moved the meeting up. It was supposed to be at 2. He got 3 other members to agree to 10 a.m. citing scheduling. It's not scheduling. He knows you've been working around the clock. He wants you exhausted and underprepared. A pause. And there's more. He's bringing someone, an outside consultant, a restoration expert who's going to sit in that room and pick apart your design in front of everyone. He's paid this man to make you look like an amateur, Daniel. It's an ambush. Daniel was quiet for a second. He looked at the clock. He looked at Lily's closed bedroom door. He looked at the model on the table. Who's the expert? His name is Harmon. Curtis Harmon. He's legitimate. He's done real restorations. He teaches at the university. Ashford spent good money on him. He's going to sit across from you and use 40 years of credentials to tell the room you don't know what you're doing. Curtis Harmon, Daniel repeated. And then, to Victoria's confusion, he laughed. Quietly, but he laughed. Daniel, this is not funny. This man could— Victoria, Daniel said. Do you know who taught the night class I took 11 years ago? The one I took after work for 2 years because I couldn't afford the day program, and I wanted to learn restoration, even though I knew I'd never get to use it. He was smiling now, actually smiling. Curtis Harmon taught that class. I sat in the third row for 2 years. He wrote a recommendation letter for me that I still have in a drawer somewhere. He is not going to sit in that room and take Gerald Ashford's money to tell 14 people that his own former student doesn't know what he's doing. The line went silent. You know him, Victoria said. He gave me a B+ and told me it was the highest grade he'd given in 6 years. He said— Daniel's voice caught just slightly. He said I had the eye. That's the word he used. He said the eye can't be taught, and I had it, and it was a shame I'd probably never get to use it because guys like me don't get the chance. Daniel looked at the model. Well, I got the chance, and Ashford just walked his own trap in and hired the one man in the city who told me I could do this. You have to be sure, Victoria said. If you're wrong about him, if he's changed, if the money's enough— He's not going to change for Gerald Ashford's money, Daniel said. I sat in that man's class for 2 years. You know what he told us on the first night? He said, they'll offer you money your whole career to tear down beautiful things and put up profitable ones. And most of you will take it because you have families and mortgages. But the ones who don't, the ones who hold the line even once, those are the ones who leave something behind. Daniel picked up his keys. He's not going to help Ashford knock down the Ardmore. He's going to walk into that room ready to bury me, and then he's going to see my drawings. He looked at the door. Get Lily's babysitter. I'm coming to that meeting. The boardroom was on the 42nd floor, all glass and steel, the kind of room designed to make a man in a gray suit feel small. Daniel felt it working on him the second he stepped off the elevator. 14 people around a table the size of his entire dining room. Gerald Ashford at the far end, silver-haired, expensive, radiating the calm of a man who has already counted the votes. And beside Ashford, a lean older man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a leather portfolio in front of him. Curtis Harmon looked up when Daniel walked in. And Daniel watched it happen, watched the moment of blank professional politeness, and then the double take, and then the recognition, and then something Daniel hadn't dared hope for. Curtis Harmon's face broke into a slow private smile. Well, I'll be damned, Harmon said quietly, mostly to himself. Mr. Harmon. Ashford said, misreading it entirely. Do you know the architect? Third row, Harmon said. 2 years of night class, best I ever taught. He was still smiling. Gerald, you didn't tell me the architect was Daniel Hayes. Ashford's calm flickered just for a second. You know him. I taught him everything he knows about restoration, Harmon said. Which, if memory serves, means he knows quite a lot. This should be interesting. He leaned back and folded his hands, and the entire dynamic of the room shifted, and Ashford felt it, and Ashford didn't like it. Victoria stood at the head of the table. She looked at Daniel, and something passed between them steady. Here I'm present. We're doing this. And then she addressed the room in the voice that had built an empire. Thank you all for accommodating the schedule change, she said with a coolness aimed directly at Ashford that made 2 board members hide smiles. You've all reviewed the demolition proposal for the Ardmore site. Before we vote, I've asked Mr. Hayes to present an alternative. He has the floor. And Daniel Hayes stood up in a room built to make him feel small, and he was not small at all. He didn't start with the tiles. He'd learned that lesson at the wedding, learned it 100 times over in his life. You don't lead with the heart in a room full of men who've trained themselves to distrust it. He led with the numbers. He put the financial model on the screen, and he walked 14 shareholders through it line by line. And he did it in the flat, precise, unbothered voice of a man who has checked his math 4 times and knows it's right. The tower's year 1 return is superior, Daniel said. I'm not going to insult anyone in this room by pretending otherwise. If your investment horizon is 18 months, build the tower. He clicked to the next slide. But nobody at this table has an 18-month horizon. You're a holding company. You hold. So let's talk about what you're actually holding. He walked them through the depreciation curve, the appreciation curve, the premium on historic residential, the point 15 years out where the two lines crossed and the Ardmore pulled decisively ahead and never looked back. The tower is a sprint. The Ardmore is compound interest. And I've never met a wealthy person who got that way betting against compound interest. Two of the board members were nodding. Ashford saw them nodding. This is very creative, Ashford said, cutting in smoothly, for a residential architect. But Mr. Hayes, with respect, financial projections are easy to make optimistic when you're not the one on the hook for them. The restoration cost alone is on slide 9, Daniel said. Fully loaded with a 20% contingency because I've done enough real projects to know that historic buildings hide surprises and only a fool budgets without a cushion. He clicked to it. I've been conservative everywhere. Mr. Ashford would want me to be optimistic, and the model still works. You're welcome to have your finance team audit every number. I'd encourage it. It'll hold. Ashford's jaw tightened. He'd expected a dreamer with pretty drawings. He'd gotten a man with a spreadsheet who'd anticipated his every objection. Perhaps. Ashford said, changing tactics, turning to his consultant. We should hear from an actual expert. Mr. Harmon has 40 years in historic restoration. Curtis, in your professional opinion, is this design achievable? Or is it, as I suspect, an amateur's fantasy dressed up in a nice spreadsheet? And there it was. The trap sprung. Every head in the room turned to Curtis Harmon. Harmon took his time. He pulled his reading glasses down off his forehead. He paged slowly through the drawings Daniel had sent ahead, and the room waited, and Ashford waited with the small, satisfied stillness of a man about to watch his money do its work. May I ask the architect a question directly? Harmon said. Of course, Victoria said. Harmon looked at Daniel over the top of his glasses. The geometric stair, in the east stairwell. You're proposing to preserve it rather than replace it with code-compliant new construction. Most restoration architects would gut it. It's a liability. It doesn't meet modern egress width. It'll cost you a fortune in variances. He leaned forward. Defend it. The room went quiet. It was a test, and everyone knew it, and Daniel understood exactly what his old teacher was doing. He wasn't attacking. He was handing Daniel the ball. You can't replace it, Daniel said, because nobody can build it. It's a self-supporting geometric stair-cut stone, no central column. There are maybe a dozen people left alive who understand the geometry, and none of them are cheap, and that's precisely why it's worth saving. The variance is expensive, yes. But you don't preserve a stair like that because it's cheap. You preserve it because it's the single most valuable object in the building, because it's the thing no amount of money can reproduce, which makes it the definition of an appreciating asset. Daniel looked steadily at his old teacher. You taught me that, Mr. Harmon, first month of class. The things you can't rebuild are the only things worth keeping. Curtis Harmon sat back. And then slowly he took off his glasses entirely, and he turned to face Gerald Ashford, and he addressed the whole table. Gerald, Harmon said, you paid me to come in here and tell you this young man is an amateur. I'm going to give you your money's worth, so I'll be precise. He set his glasses on the table. In 40 years of teaching and practice, I have met perhaps 5 architects with a true eye for a building, the ability to look at a ruined structure and see not what it costs, but what it is. Daniel Hayes is one of them. I knew it 11 years ago, when he was sitting in the 3rd row of my night class, exhausted after a full day's work, and this presentation confirms it. His numbers are sound. His preservation strategy is not just achievable, it's better than what I'd have proposed myself, and I've been doing this since before he was born. Harmon picked his glasses back up and put them in his pocket. A man finished with his work. You hired the wrong expert, Gerald. You wanted someone to bury him. I'm not going to bury a man for doing the finest work in this room. If you want that done, you'll have to pay someone with looser standards than mine. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Daniel had ever heard. Ashford's face had gone gray. He'd spent good money to build a trap, and the trap had turned around and bitten him in front of the entire board, and he knew it, and worse, he knew everyone else knew it. But Gerald Ashford had not gotten where he was by losing gracefully. "Fine," he said, and his voice had dropped all its silk. "Fine. Let's dispense with the theater. The design is competent. I'll concede the design." He stood up, and now he was looking not at Daniel, but at Victoria, and Daniel understood that the real attack had only just begun. But this vote was never really about the design, was it, Victoria? Let's be honest with the room, since we're being honest. Let's talk about why the CEO of this company spent 4 months refusing to sign a demolition order that would make us all a great deal of money. Let's talk about why she personally recruited an unknown residential architect from a wedding, I'm told, and has apparently been spending her evenings at his home. The room went very still. Daniel felt it, the temperature change, 14 people suddenly recalculating. "Careful," Victoria said. Her voice was ice. "I'm being very careful," Ashford said. "I'm being careful to protect this company from a CEO whose judgment has been compromised by a personal entanglement she won't disclose. That's my fiduciary duty, so let me ask you directly in front of the board you answer to." He leaned forward, both hands on the table. "Is your relationship with Mr. Hayes strictly professional, or has the great Victoria Sterling let a hard luck story and a cute kid cloud a 9-figure decision that affects every shareholder in this room?" And there it was. The thing he'd been building toward. He'd lost the design fight, so he'd change the war. If he couldn't kill the building on the merits, he'd kill it by killing her credibility, by making the whole room look at Victoria and see not a brilliant CEO, but a lonely woman who'd fallen for the wrong man and lost her edge. Daniel started to stand up to say something to take the hit for her to tell the room it was all his doing, but Victoria put a hand on his shoulder and pressed him gently back down. "I've got this," she said quietly. Just to him. And then Victoria Sterling stood up straight, and she looked Gerald Ashford dead in the eye, and she did the last thing in the world he expected. She told the truth. "You want to know if it's personal?" she said. Her voice was clear, and it carried to every corner of that room. "I'll tell you. Yes, it's personal." A ripple went through the board. Ashford blinked, thrown. He'd expected denial, and denial was what he'd built his trap to catch. "But not the way you're hoping, Gerald, so let me finish before you start measuring the drapes in my office." She walked slowly around the table as she spoke. 4 months ago, I couldn't sign that demolition order, and I didn't know why. I told myself it was strategy. It wasn't strategy. It was that every time I looked at the drawings for that tower, I felt like I was signing off on something I'd regret, and I couldn't articulate why, and it was making me crazy. And yes, Gerald, it was affecting my judgment because I was trying to make a decision with half the information. She reached Daniel's end of the table and stopped. And then I met a man at a wedding who looked at a broken building and saw what it was worth instead of what it cost. And I hired him. Not because of a cute kid. Not because I'm lonely, though. God knows you've all decided I must be. I hired him because he could see the thing I couldn't. And I needed to see it before I destroyed something irreplaceable on the advice of men like you who've never in your lives valued anything you couldn't liquidate by Friday. The room was dead silent. Ashford's mouth opened. "Is it personal?" Victoria went on, and now her voice dropped, and somehow that made it land harder. "This man quit a steady job to save your asset. He built you a financial model your own finance team couldn't have improved on. He brought in the one restoration expert in this city credible enough to shut down the man you paid to ambush him. And he did it without knowing. That's who you'd hire. That was luck. But the rest of it, Gerald? The rest of it was work. So yes, it's personal. I take it personally that this company spent 4 months about to make $100 million mistake. And one man I found at a wedding is the reason we didn't. If that's the compromised judgment you're worried about." She looked around the whole table now, meeting every pair of eyes. "Then I'd suggest every one of you pray I stay exactly this compromised, because it just saved you a fortune." Nobody moved. And then Curtis Harmon from his seat started to clap. Slowly. Once, twice. And a board member near the window joined him. And then another. Ashford stood at the end of the table with his hands still flat on the wood, and he understood the way a man understands the moment a fight is lost, that he had reached too far. He'd tried to turn her honesty into a weakness, and she'd stood up and turned it into the most compelling argument in the room. "I call the vote," Ashford said, because it was the only move he had left, and he said it like a man hoping the numbers he'd counted the night before would still hold. They didn't. They went around the table, and Daniel counted along with them the way he counted everything, and he watched the tower die. One raised hand at a time. Ashford's block held, but his block wasn't the whole room anymore, because two of the members he'd been sure of had watched a subdivision architect out-argue a paid expert, and a CEO stand up and tell the truth when a lie would have been easier and they'd changed their minds in the last 20 minutes. When it was done, the restoration had the votes. Not by much, but by enough. Victoria didn't celebrate. She simply nodded once like a woman who'd expected nothing less and said, "The motion carries. The Ardmore stands. Mr. Hayes leads the restoration. This meeting is adjourned." And Gerald Ashford picked up his things and walked out of that boardroom without a word, and everyone in the room understood that his time on the board was measured now in weeks. Daniel found Victoria alone in her office an hour later, standing at the window, looking out over the whole city, the lopsided paper swan on the desk behind her. "You didn't have to do that," Daniel said from the doorway. "You could have denied it. It would have been cleaner. He handed you the easy way out, and you didn't take it." Victoria didn't turn around. "I'm done lying about what things are worth to me," she said. "I've spent 4 years telling everyone I'm fine, telling the board I'm fine, telling the press I'm fine, telling myself I'm fine, standing in the corner of every wedding pretending I don't feel anything." She turned around then. "I watched you kneel down at that wedding and tell your daughter the truth about a cruel man kindly in front of 200 people. And I thought I've forgotten how to do that. I've forgotten how to just say the true thing out loud." She looked at him. "So today I said it, out loud, in front of the people who could hurt me most with it. And you know what happened, Daniel? You won. I felt like myself for the first time in 4 years." Her voice went rough. "That's what happened, not the vote. The vote's just money. I felt like the person I was before I buried James and turned into a woman who lives in a corner." She crossed the room toward him. "You did that. You and a 6-year-old with a paper swan. You walked into my life 11 days ago and started tearing down every wall I spent 4 years building, and I should be furious about it. And instead She stopped. "Instead, you what?" Daniel said quietly. They were standing very close now. There was no board meeting anymore. No Ashford, no live wire in the room, no accusation to keep them apart. Just the two of them, and a paper swan, and 11 days that had rebuilt them both. "Instead, I keep finding reasons to come to your dining room," Victoria said. "And I'm out of reasons, Daniel. The building's saved. The vote's over. I don't have a professional excuse to sit at your table anymore." Her eyes searched his face. "So, I'm going to have to come up with a different reason. And I'm terrified of what that reason is because the last time I let myself have a reason like that, I lost him 11 days before the wedding, and I don't think I'd survive it twice." Daniel reached up slowly, and he put his hand against the side of her face, and she let him, and she leaned into it, and 4 years of carefully built distance came down all at once. "Here's what I know," Daniel said. "I know I lost Sarah, and I thought that was the end of my story. I know I decided the best part of my life was already over, and the only thing left was to hold the line for Lily. I know I came to that wedding to be invisible." His thumb moved gently against her cheek. "And then a woman I was sure would never even look at me walked across a whole room to stand up for my daughter. And I've spent 11 days feeling something I swore I'd never feel again, and being scared out of my mind about it, same as you." He took a breath. "I can't promise you nothing bad will ever happen, Victoria. Nobody can promise that. You know that better than anyone. But I can promise you, I'll show up. Every day. That's the only thing I've ever been good at. Showing up. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Victoria's eyes were wet, and she didn't fight it. And for a woman who'd trained herself for 4 years, never to cry in front of anyone, letting him see it was the biggest thing she could have done. "That's the whole game, isn't it?" she whispered. "Showing up. You said it about Lily. That's the whole answer. That's the whole answer." And Victoria Sterling, billionaire, glacial, impossible to impress. Alone in a too-big house for 4 years, closed the last of the distance and pressed her forehead against his, and they stood there together in the quiet, two people who'd both been so sure their stories were over, discovering at the same moment that they'd only been paused. Behind them on the desk, where she made every decision worth millions, a lopsided paper swan with one wing bigger than the other kept its silent watch over the two of them. And for the first time in 4 years, Victoria Sterling wasn't looking at it to remember what mattered. She was looking at the man in front of her, because now she knew. They didn't tell Lily right away, not because they were hiding it, but because Daniel had learned something about being a single father that Victoria was only beginning to understand. You didn't hand a 6-year-old a big new thing carelessly. Lily had already lost one whole world. You didn't introduce another one to her the way you'd introduce a business partner. You let it grow slow in the quiet, in the ordinary places, until one day the child looked up and realized the thing had always been there. So it grew slow. Victoria started coming to the house not as an architect's client, but as something else, something neither of them named for a while. She'd show up on a Saturday morning with grocery bags because she'd noticed again that Daniel bought for Lily and skipped himself, and this time she didn't call it a business expense. "You bought vegetables," Daniel said, going through the bags. "You bought, is this kale, Victoria? Nobody in this house eats kale." "Somebody in this house is going to start," Victoria said, "because somebody in this house has been running on coffee and toast for 11 days, and I've decided I'm putting a stop to it." "You've decided." "I've decided. I run a company, Daniel. Deciding things is what I do." She was already opening cabinets, learning where things went, which was its own kind of intimacy, a woman learning the geography of a man's kitchen. "Where do you keep the—" "You don't have a colander, do you?" "I have a strainer." "That is a strainer for pasta, and a colander is—" She stopped, turned around, found Daniel leaning against the counter grinning at her. "You're laughing at me." "I've never seen you not know where something is," Daniel said. "You always know where everything is. You walk into a room and you've got the whole thing mapped in 3 seconds, and you don't know where my colander is." "You don't own a colander." "I don't own a colander," Daniel agreed. "Which is the whole point. There's finally something Victoria Sterling can't find, and it's in my kitchen." She threw a dish towel at him. It was the first time she'd ever done something that silly, and she felt the strangeness of it, the way her own body did something spontaneous and unguarded, and she watched Daniel catch the towel out of the air and laugh, and she thought, "This is what James meant. This is the thing I stopped being able to do." Lily wandered in, then, drawn by the noise the way she always was, and stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene, the swan lady in the kitchen, groceries everywhere, her dad laughing, an actual dish towel in the air. "Is Victoria making dinner?" Lily asked. "Victoria is attempting to make dinner," Daniel said. "It's touch and go. She can't find the colander." "We don't have a colander," Lily said. "We have a strainer. It's the blue thing." Victoria pointed at Lily. "Thank you. See, someone in this house is competent." Lily beamed and climbed onto a chair to supervise, and that was how it started. Really, not with a conversation, not with an announcement, but with a Saturday and a bag of kale nobody wanted, and a 6-year-old showing a billionaire where the strainer was kept. The restoration of the Ardmore took 11 months, and it changed all 3 of them. Daniel threw himself into it with a focus he hadn't brought to anything since before Sarah died. He was on site every day. He learned the names of every worker the way Victoria knew her security guards, and he learned their kids' names too, because he'd picked up more from her than he realized. When the crew uncovered the hand-painted ceiling in the old tea room under a century of grime and a drop ceiling some idiot had installed in the 70s, Daniel called Victoria and made her come down in the middle of a workday to see it. "Look up," he said when she walked in. Don't say anything, just look up. She looked up. The leaves and forgotten flowers cleaned now, the colors coming back 100 years old and looking down at them. Somebody painted that lying on their back on scaffolding, Daniel said, for weeks. A person whose name we'll never know. And they did it beautifully, even though they must have known most people would never look up and see it. He was quiet a moment. That's the whole thing, isn't it? Doing it beautifully, even when nobody's looking. Even when there's no reason to, except that it's the right way to do it. Victoria looked at the ceiling, and then she looked at him, and she said something she'd been circling for weeks. I want you to meet someone, she said. Or I want to tell you about someone. James. Daniel went still. You've never asked me about him. Everybody asks. The board, the press, my sister. Everybody wants the story, the tragic engagement 11 days before. You never once asked. It's yours to tell, Daniel said. Not mine to ask for. He'd have loved this ceiling, Victoria said, looking up again. He'd have loved that a stranger painted it 100 years ago for people who'd never look up. That was exactly the kind of thing that made him crazy about me. He used to say I was so busy building things that pay off that I'd forgotten there were things worth doing that don't pay off at all. Her voice was steady, but only barely. I loved him, Daniel. I want you to know that. I'm not going to pretend I didn't, and I'm not going to pretend I've stopped because I don't think you stop. Do you? You don't stop loving Sarah. No, Daniel said quietly. You don't stop. So I need to know that's okay, Victoria said, and there was a real fear underneath it. Because I don't know how to do this any other way. I can't pretend James didn't happen. And I don't want you to pretend Sarah didn't. And most people can't handle that. Most people want to be the only one. They want you to close the door on everything before them, and Victoria. Daniel crossed the room. Look at me. There is no door I'm asking you to close. Sarah is Lily's mother. She's half of my daughter's face. She's in this building right now because half of what I know about seeing things she taught me. I'm never closing that door, and I'd never ask you to close yours. He took her hands. We're not replacing anybody. That's not what this is. James gets to stay. Sarah gets to stay. There's room. That's the whole thing about a heart nobody tells you it doesn't run out. It just makes more room. Victoria pressed her face into his shoulder, and under a 100-year-old ceiling painted by a stranger, she let herself be held by a man who wasn't asking her to forget anything. And it was, she thought, the first fully honest embrace she'd had in 4 years. The night they told Lily they did it together, and they did it carefully, and it still didn't go the way they planned, because it never does with children. They sat her down after dinner. Daniel had rehearsed it in his head a dozen times. He started slow. Lily, sweetheart, Daddy wants to talk to you about something. About Victoria. Lily looked between them with the flat, patient, all-seeing gaze of a 6-year-old who has already figured out what the adults think they're about to reveal. Are you getting married? Lily asked. Daniel choked on nothing. No. That's not what we're not. Okay, Lily said, unbothered. But is Victoria going to be around more? Like forever more. Not just visiting more. Victoria found her voice first. Would that be okay with you? If I was around more? Forever more. Lily considered this with tremendous seriousness. And then she asked the question that undid both of them. The question that only a child who has lost a parent could think to ask, the question that had been sitting under everything. Are you going to try to be my mom? The room went very quiet. Daniel started to speak, but Victoria touched his arm, and she got down on the floor in front of Lily the way she had at the wedding, eye to eye. And she answered the little girl honestly, because she'd made a decision months ago never to lie to this child. No, Victoria said gently. I'm not going to try to be your mom. You already have a mom. Her name was Sarah, and she loved you more than anything in the whole world, and nobody is ever going to take her place, and I would never, ever try. She took a breath. Your mom is a spot in your heart that's just for her. That spot is hers forever. I'm not going to touch it. Lily's lip trembled. Then what are you going to be? I don't know yet, Victoria said. I think that's up to you, actually. I think you get to decide. But here's what I know, I'll be no matter what you call it. She took Lily's small hands in hers. I'll be someone who shows up. Someone who's there when you get out of school, and there for the bad dreams, and there for the school projects that are due tomorrow that you forgot to mention until bedtime. I'll be another person who loves you, that's all. Not instead of anybody. Just one more. Because you can never have too many people who love you. That's the one thing there's no limit on. Lily was quiet for a long moment, and then in the way children do, she reached the center of the entire thing in a single sentence. You held my hand, Lily said. When you read me the frog story, you held my hand the whole time. I did, Victoria whispered. My mom used to hold my hand. Lily's eyes were wet now. I'm starting to not remember it. What it felt like. And when you held my hand, it felt like... She stopped, 6 years old, and reaching for something too big for her words. It felt like remembering. And Victoria Sterling, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without her heart rate breaking, 60, broke completely right there on the floor of Daniel's living room and pulled the little girl into her arms, and Lily let her and Daniel stood over the two of them with his hand pressed over his mouth, and none of them said anything for a long time, because there was nothing left that needed saying. It wasn't a fairy tale. Daniel had promised her that once, and it turned out to be true. There were hard days. There were days when Victoria's old reflexes kicked in, and she disappeared into work for 70 hours, and Daniel had to sit her down and remind her of the second condition, the one from the very beginning. You don't get to disappear on me, and she'd fight it because 4 years of habit doesn't dissolve in a few months, and then she'd hear herself and stop and come home. There were days when Daniel's grief ambushed him out of nowhere. A song, a smell the anniversary, and he'd go quiet and far away, and it was Victoria who learned to recognize the flinch and not take it personally, because she had one just like it. They were in the end uniquely equipped to love each other, precisely because they'd both already been broken in the same place. Neither of them needed the other to explain the grief. They just recognized it the way you recognize your own reflection in a dark window, the way they had across a wedding hall the first night. There was one fight, a real one, 3 months in that nearly ended it. Victoria's sister had said something at a family dinner, offhand cruel, in the way family can be cruel, about how convenient it was that Victoria had found a ready-made family, a widower, and his daughter, right when she was getting older and running out of time to have her own. She'd said it lightly. She'd said it with a smile. And she'd planted a poison in Victoria that grew all the way home in the car. Is that what this is? Victoria said in Daniel's kitchen, and her voice had gone back to the ice he hadn't heard in months. Am I convenient? A rich woman with no kids of her own playing house with somebody else's family? Because it's easier than starting from scratch. Daniel put down the dish he was drying. You want to have that fight, he said. Fine, let's have it. Say the rest of it. Say what you're really asking. I'm asking if I'm a placeholder, Victoria said, and her voice cracked. For the family you lost. If I'm just the woman who fills the empty chair. If Lily needed a mother, and I was available, and that's the whole... Stop. Daniel crossed the kitchen. Stop it. Look at me. He took her face in his hands. Your sister is scared of you. She's always been scared of you, you told me that yourself. So she found the one thing that would hurt, and she said it, and now you're standing in my kitchen letting her win. His voice dropped. You're not filling a chair, Victoria. You didn't come to that wedding looking for a family. I didn't go looking for a wife. Neither of us was shopping. We got ambushed, both of us. You walked across that room because you couldn't stand watching a man be cruel to a child. And I fell for you somewhere between the tiles and the paper swan. And there was nothing convenient about any of it, because falling in love again when you're terrified of losing someone again is the single least convenient thing a person can do. He wiped a tear off her cheek with his thumb. If I wanted convenient, I'd have stayed alone. Alone is convenient. You're the opposite of convenient. You're the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. And I choose you anyway, every single day. That's not convenience. That's the bravest thing I've got. Victoria broke, and this time Daniel caught her, and they stood in the kitchen, holding each other, and the fight didn't end the relationship, it did the opposite. It was the moment they both stopped being afraid it would be taken away, because they'd survived the first real test, and the thing was still standing. The Ardmore reopened on a Saturday in the fall. Daniel stood in the restored lobby, the 482 tiles gleaming green and gold, cleaned by hand over 3 weeks, every single one saved. And he watched people walk in for the first time, and look up, and stop, and go quiet, the way people do in the presence of something made with care. There was a bronze plaque by the door. Victoria had insisted on it. Daniel had fought her about it for a week, and lost. The Ardmore, restored 2026. Lead architect Daniel Hayes. Because the things you can't rebuild are the only things worth keeping. The last line was Harmon's from a night class 11 years ago, and Daniel had wept when he saw it cast in bronze standing right there in the finished lobby, because a man who'd been told his whole life that guys like him don't get the chance had just gotten his name put permanently on a building that would outlive him. Lily found him by the plaque. She was 7 now, she'd had a birthday during the construction, and Victoria had thrown her a party in the half-finished building hard hats for all the kids, which Lily still described as the best day of her life. "Daddy," Lily said, reading the plaque, slowly sounding out the words. "It says your name." "It does." "On the whole building." "On the whole building." Lily thought about this. Then she looked up at him with an expression so much like Sarah's that it stopped his heart that same clear-eyed pride. "Mom would think this was so cool," Lily said. And Daniel knelt down right there in the lobby he'd saved, and he pulled his daughter in, and over her shoulder. He saw Victoria standing across the room watching them, and he understood in that moment that he had somehow, against every odd, against everything he'd believed 3 years ago, at the bottom of his grief, been given a second whole life. "Yeah, baby," he said. "Your mom would think this was so cool. And you know what? So does Victoria. And there's room for both of them to think so. There's room for all of it." Lily pulled back and looked at him seriously. "Daddy, I decided," she announced, "what Victoria's going to be. I've been thinking about it for a really long time." Daniel felt Victoria go still across the room, close enough now to hear, and he felt his own breath catch. "Yeah, what did you decide, sweetheart?" Lily said it simply the way children say the most enormous things like they weigh nothing at all. "She's my Victoria," Lily said. "Not my mom. My mom's my mom. Victoria's my Victoria. That's her own thing. She gets her own name because she's her own person who loves me." Lily nodded, satisfied with her own logic. "And nobody else in the whole world has a Victoria. Just me. Just." And Victoria Sterling, who had built an empire, who had buried the man she was supposed to marry, who had spent 4 years in the corner of every room, being somewhere else entirely crossed the lobby of the building that a single dad had saved, and knelt down next to the two of them, and became permanently and forever somebody's Victoria. "That's the best job I've ever been offered," she told Lily, and her voice didn't break, because for once she didn't need it to. "And I ran a whole company, but this one's better." She held out her pinky. "Deal." Lily hooked her finger through it, the same pinky promise from the wedding all the way back at the beginning, before any of them knew. "Deal," Lily said, and the 3 of them knelt there together on the green and gold tiles, in the light that a 100-year-old building still caught exactly the way its builders intended. And a man who'd come to a wedding only to disappear looked at the woman who'd walked across a room to find him, and understood that the smallest decision he'd ever made showing up, opening the door, letting someone see him, had turned out to be the one that gave him everything back. The proposal came a year after the pinky promise, and it did not happen the way anyone would have scripted it. Victoria had imagined in the private way she imagined things she'd never say out loud, that if it ever happened, Daniel would be the one to do it. He was the romantic one, after all, the man who put paper swans in architectural drawings and talked about light like it was a living thing. She'd assumed she'd be on the receiving end, and she'd assumed she'd cry, and she'd assumed it would be at the Ardmore, because everything meaningful in their lives seemed to happen at the Ardmore. She was wrong on every count because she was the one who did it, and she did it in a kitchen over a colander she'd finally bought him. "I got you something?" Victoria said one ordinary Tuesday night while Daniel was straining pasta. "You're always getting me something. You have a problem. We've discussed this. This one's different." She set a box on the counter. Not a jewelry box. A plain brown box, the kind a hardware store would use. Daniel wiped his hands and opened it, and inside was a colander. A good one. Stainless steel heavy, the kind that would last 40 years. "You bought me a colander," Daniel said, and he was grinning because this was an old joke by now. The colander he didn't own. The one thing Victoria Sterling couldn't find in his kitchen the first time she'd tried to cook. "This is the most romantic gift I've ever—" "Look underneath it," Victoria said. And Daniel lifted this colander out of the box, and underneath, sitting in the bottom, was a ring. A plain band. Not a diamond the size of an eyeball, not the kind of thing a billionaire buys to prove a point, a simple band, the kind of thing a man who counts tiles and gallons of gas would understand. Daniel went very still. "I'm not good at this," Victoria said, and her voice, the voice that had built an empire and closed 100 deals, was shaking. "I've said hard things in boardrooms my whole life, and I don't know how to say this one. So I'm just going to say it plain, the way you taught me. The way you tell Lily the truth." She took a breath. "I spent 4 years believing my life ended in a hospital hallway. I told everyone I was fine. I built walls so high nobody could climb them, and I told myself I liked it up there alone where nothing could reach me. And then a man knelt down at a wedding and told his daughter that a cruel man was just unhappy inside." Her eyes were wet now, and she didn't fight it. "I've watched you show up every single day for 2 years. Through the good days and the days your grief knocks you flat, and the days mine does. You never once asked me to be less than I am, or to forget the person I lost, or to be anything but exactly myself. Do you know how rare that is? I've been in rooms with the most powerful people on earth. Not one of them ever offered me that." She picked up the ring. "So I'm asking. Not because I'm lonely, not because you're convenient. My sister was wrong about that, and I finally believe it. I'm asking because you're the bravest thing that ever happened to me, and I choose you every single day the way you chose me. Daniel Hayes. Will you marry me?" For a long moment, Daniel didn't say anything. He looked at the ring, and then at the woman holding it, and then, of all things, he laughed a wet, disbelieving laugh, and put his hand over his eyes. "You proposed to me with a colander," he said. "I proposed to you with a colander. The one thing you couldn't find in my kitchen. The first day. When you threw the dish towel at me. I've been planning it since the dish towel," Victoria admitted. "I know it's ridiculous. I know I could have done something at the Ardmore with a string quartet, and I—" "Don't you dare," Daniel said, pulling his hand away from his eyes. "Don't you dare apologize for this. A string quartet at the Ardmore would have been for other people. This is ours. Nobody else would even understand it. A colander." He was crying now too openly, the way he'd learned to do around her, the way he never did around anyone else. "You found the one gift on earth that means our whole story, and doesn't mean a single thing to anybody else. That's Victoria, that's the most us thing you could have possibly done. Is that a yes?" "Of course it's a yes." He pulled her into him. "It was a yes 11 days after the wedding. It was a yes the first time I heard you laugh. It's been a yes for 2 years. I was just waiting for me to be brave enough." "For you to be ready," Daniel corrected gently. "There's a difference. You were always brave. You just needed to know it was safe." And then a voice came from the hallway, small and delighted, and entirely unsurprised, because Lily had been listening the whole time, because Lily was always listening. "Finally," Lily said. They both turned. She was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, 8 years old now, arms crossed, wearing the expression of a person whose patience has finally been rewarded. "You knew about this," Daniel said. Victoria asked me first. Lily said matter of fact. Weeks ago, she asked if it was okay, if I minded. She rolled her eyes with the theatrical exhaustion only an 8-year-old can produce. I said, obviously not. I've been waiting for you guys to figure it out for like 100 years. Daniel looked at Victoria. You asked her first. Of course I asked her first, Victoria said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I wasn't just proposing to you, Daniel. I know exactly what I'm marrying into. I'm marrying into both of you. She gets a vote. She's always gotten a vote. She looked at Lily. And she voted yes, twice technically because I made her confirm it because I was terrified. Lily crossed the kitchen and inserted herself into the middle of the hug the way she always did, and the three of them stood there in the small kitchen with a colander on the counter and a ring on Daniel's finger. And it was all of them agreed. Later, the best proposal that ever happened, precisely because it happened over a strainer and a joke, and an 8-year-old's rolled eyes. Tuck. They were married in the spring in the garden of the same lakeside estate where a lonely man had once hidden in a corner, and a billionaire had once planned to leave after 90 minutes. It was Daniel's idea to hold it there. Victoria had resisted at first. That place, she said. Of all places. We could get married anywhere. We could get married at the Ardmore, which would at least make sense, or, it has to be there, Daniel said. Think about it. That's where it started. That's where you walked across a whole room to stand up for my daughter. That's where I heard you laugh for the first time. That's the exact spot where two people who'd both given up got a second chance and didn't even know it yet. He took her hands. I want to stand in that garden again. But this time, I don't want to be hiding in the corner. This time, I want to be standing right in the middle of it, where everyone can see me marrying you. His voice caught. The first time I was there, I couldn't wait to leave. I want to go back and stay. I want to rewrite the ending of that night. Does that make sense? It made complete sense, and Victoria said yes, and so they went back. The wedding was small. That surprised the business press who'd expected a billionaire spectacle, 500 guests, and a magazine spread. Instead, there were 40 people. Michael Daniel's brother, whose own wedding had started, the whole thing stood as best man and cried through the entire ceremony. Curtis Harmon was there, older now, retired fully, who'd become something like a grandfather to Lily over the 2 years of the restoration and after. Victoria's security guards were there, all 9 of them, invited personally, and the 3 whose kids' college she'd secretly paid for finally understood that day, watching her exactly who they'd been working for all those years. And Lily walked Victoria down the aisle. That had been Lily's idea, and it had made both adults cry when she proposed it standing in the kitchen with the seriousness she brought to all her most important decisions. Victoria doesn't have anybody to walk her, Lily had reasoned. Her mom and dad aren't around, and she doesn't have a dad to do it, and I don't want her to walk by herself. Nobody should walk by themselves. She'd looked between them. So I'll do it. I'll walk her to you, Daddy. And then I'll be standing right there in the middle when you two, do the thing, get married. So we're all together for the whole part. And that was how it happened. An 8-year-old in a pale green dress, green and gold, like the tiles, her own choice. Nobody had suggested it walked a billionaire across a garden and delivered her to a man who'd once come to that same garden only to disappear. When they reached him, Lily didn't step aside the way tradition demanded. She stood right between them, holding one hand from each, and when the officiant began, she stayed there, and nobody moved her because that was the whole point. They weren't 2 people getting married. They were 3 people becoming permanent. The officiant, an old friend of Michael's, had asked in advance whether they wanted to write their own vows. Victoria had said no immediately. She was a woman who'd spent a lifetime being precise with words, and she did not trust herself to be precise with these in front of people without breaking. Daniel had said yes. So when the moment came, Daniel spoke his vows, and Victoria spoke the traditional ones back, and it was perfect, because it was exactly true to who each of them was, the romantic and the fortress meeting in the middle. I'm not going to say a lot, Daniel said, holding her hands with Lily standing between them holding on. I said I'd keep it short, and I keep my promises. 2 years ago, I came to this exact garden convinced the best part of my life was already behind me. I was so sure. I'd have bet everything on it. I thought all I had left to do was hold the line for my daughter and quietly disappear. He looked at Victoria, and then down at Lily, and then back up. And then, a woman I was certain would never even look at me walked across that reception hall right over there. You can see the spot from here because she couldn't stand watching a child be treated badly. And she changed everything. Not by giving me money or a job or even a second chance, though she gave me all three. His voice thickened. She changed everything by teaching me the thing I thought I already knew. That showing up is the whole game. I'd been showing up for Lily for 3 years, and I thought that was all I had left in me. Victoria showed me I had more. That there was room for more. That a heart doesn't run out, it just makes more room. He took a breath. So here's my vow, and it's the only one I've got, and it's the truest thing I know how to say. I will show up. Every day. For you and for Lily, and for whatever comes. On the good days and the days grief knocks one of us flat. I will not disappear. Not into a corner, not into work, not into the past. I will be here. Present. For real. That was your one condition the very first day, and I've kept it for 2 years, and I'm going to keep it for the rest of my life. He slid the ring on. That's it. That's the whole vow. I'll show up, forever. And Victoria Sterling, who had planned so carefully to say only the safe traditional words precisely, so she wouldn't break down in front of 40 people. Broke down anyway, completely, and had to be handed a tissue by an 8-year-old who'd clearly anticipated this, and brought one in the pocket of her green and gold dress, because Lily was in the end her father's daughter, and she counted everything, and she'd counted on the grown-ups crying. They didn't have their own children. There were times in the early years when Victoria wondered aloud about it in the quiet late when the wondering came. Her sister's cruel words had planted something that took a long time to fully die. Do you ever wish? She started one night and couldn't finish it. Wish what Daniel said. He knew. He always knew. But he'd learned from her that some things have to be said out loud to lose their power. That we'd had one. Of our own. That I'd given you. Stop. Daniel rolled over to face her in the dark. Let me tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it. Not just let it slide past. I have a daughter. We have a daughter. Lily isn't half a family that we filled in with you. She's not a placeholder for the kids we didn't have. She's the whole thing. And you... He found her face in the dark. You didn't step into an empty spot. There was no empty spot. You made a new one. You're not a replacement for the mother Lily lost. You're a whole additional person who loves her, which Lily figured out when she was 7. Remember her own Victoria. Nobody else in the world has one. He kissed her forehead. We're not incomplete, Victoria. We were never incomplete. We're exactly the right size. 3. That's our number. It's not a number that's missing anything. It's a number that's full. And Victoria let that in finally, all the way she'd let so few things in over her life, and the wondering stopped coming after that, because she believed him, because he'd never once lied to her, because the truth was that the three of them fit together with no gaps and no missing pieces, and had from the very beginning. Lily grew up. That's the thing that happens. The thing nobody warns you about. The 8-year-old in the green and gold dress became a teenager, and then impossibly someone about to leave. She was 17 when she stood in the lobby of the Ardmore one afternoon, home from a college visit, and found Victoria there, and the two of them stood together, looking up at the hand-painted ceiling the way they had 100 times. I'm going to study architecture, Lily said. She hadn't told her father yet. She told Victoria first, which meant something, which meant everything. I decided. I want to do what Dad does. I want to save buildings nobody else can see. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Your father is going to cry for a week. I know, Lily grinned. That's why I'm telling you first, so you can warn him. He'd want you to have your own dream, you know, not his. He'd never want you to feel like you had to. It's not his dream, Lily said. It's mine. It just started as his. She looked up at the ceiling at the leaves and forgotten flowers a stranger had painted 100 and some years ago. You know what I remember? From when I was little, before all this. She paused. I remember being at Uncle Mikey's wedding, and some man said something mean about me, and I didn't understand what I did wrong, and my dad knelt down and told me it wasn't about me at all. That the man was just unhappy inside. Lily's voice went soft. And then a lady walked all the way across the room, and I gave her a paper swan, and she promised to keep it on her desk. She turned to Victoria. Do you still have it? Victoria didn't answer with words. She reached into her bag, the same private bag she'd carried for 15 years, the one that had held a plain white card once, and she pulled out a small, flat protective case. The kind museums use, and inside it, preserved behind glass, laminated and cared for. Against the wearing of decades was a lopsided paper swan with one wing bigger than the other. Lily stared at it. You laminated it. 11 years ago, Victoria said. It was starting to fall apart. I couldn't let it fall apart. Her voice caught. You made me that at the worst moment of the loneliest 4 years of my life. You walked up to a stranger who was crying inside where nobody could see, and you handed her a swan so she wouldn't be embarrassed at her big company. You have no idea what you did that day. You were 6. You couldn't have known, but you reached across everything, and you... She stopped, pressed her lips together. You started all of it, not your father. You. He came to that wedding to disappear. He'd never have walked across that room to me. But you walked across it to him with a swan, and you gave me a reason to stay. Everything after that, the building, the marriage, all of it, this whole life, it all started with a 6-year-old and a paper swan. Lily was crying now, 17 years old, and crying in the lobby her father had saved holding a laminated swan she'd folded when she was 6. That's why I want to do it, she said. Architecture, saving things. Because you two taught me you can never build a new old thing. Once it's gone, it's gone. But if somebody looks close enough, if somebody actually sees it, you can save it before it's too late. She wiped her eyes. You saved this building. Dad saved this building. But before any of that, Victoria, you and Dad saved each other. 2 people everybody wrote off. 2 broken things nobody else could see the worth in. And you didn't tear each other down and start over. You saw what was still there under all the damage and you kept it. She looked at the swan, and then at the woman who'd laminated it, and then up at the 100-year-old ceiling. That's the only thing I want to do with my whole life. I want to be the person who sees what's worth keeping. Like Dad saw this building. Like you saw Dad. Like Dad saw you. And Victoria Sterling pulled her daughter. Her daughter no qualifier needed anymore. Not for years now, into her arms in the lobby of a building that a lonely single father had refused to let die. And understood that the truest thing she'd ever built wasn't a company or an empire or even a restored landmark with her husband's name in bronze by the door. It was this. A family that should never have existed, assembled by accident out of 2 catastrophes, and a paper swan standing in the light that a 100-year-old building still caught exactly the way its builders had intended all those years ago, when someone stood in that very spot and thought about how the sun would move through the room and then built it, and it was still doing exactly what they'd hoped. Daniel found them there an hour later. The 2 of them still talking, and he stopped in the doorway and just watched his wife and his daughter, heads bent together under the painted ceiling, and he thought about the man he'd been that night in the garden, holding a glass of champagne. He never drank, waiting for a night to end so he could go home to an empty house and a grief he was sure would last the rest of his life. That man had almost stayed home. That man had almost sent his regrets, invented a headache, missed the whole thing. If it hadn't been for a 6-year-old holding up an invitation with 2 swans on the front, asking, "Are we going?" saying maybe happy things can happen at weddings too, he'd have missed all of it. The woman who walked across the room. The building he saved. The name in bronze. The colander. The wedding in the garden where he finally got to stand in the middle instead of the corner. The daughter who grew up to see what was worth keeping. All of it had turned on a single small decision made by a frightened man who almost didn't make it. The decision to show up. Daniel crossed the lobby and joined them, and the three of them stood together under the ceiling, and Lily held the laminated swan up so the afternoon light caught it, and none of them said anything for a while, because everything worth saying had already been lived. The greatest things in a life don't announce themselves. They don't come with fanfare or certainty or a plan. They come disguised as ordinary moments, a wedding you almost skip, a stranger you almost don't talk to, a paper swan folded by a bored child, a door you keep nailed shut for 3 years, and then one night for no reason you can name, decide to open just a crack, and the whole rest of your life pours through that crack if you let it. Daniel Hayes had come to a wedding to disappear. Instead, he had shown up, truly shown up for the first time in years, and in doing so had gotten back every single thing he'd been certain he had lost forever and more that he'd never dared to want. And that is the whole truth of it. The thing worth carrying out of this story and into your own. The miracle was never the billionaire, or the money, or the building saved from the wrecking ball. The miracle was a broken man who almost stayed home and chose instead to walk into the light and let someone see him. That choice, small, terrified, and utterly ordinary, was the beginning of everything. Some people wait their whole lives for a grand plan that never comes. But the door was never going to open on its own. Somebody had to reach out and turn the handle. Daniel did, and so can you. Show up, open the door, let someone see you, because the life you think is over is very often only paused waiting patiently for the smallest brave decision to begin again.